Welcome, Brittany. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. So, Brittany, I already said this in the intro, but you have worked at CU Boulder or University
Mhm.
of Colorado Boulder,
Yeah.
Oregon State Cascades. Did I miss
Mhm.
any, or are those the two?
I also worked at Gonzaga, Simpson College, and did some graduate admissions at Harvard.
Okay. All right. But we can ignore those private colleges today
Yep.
because we're here to talk about public schools, which is actually great. I never worked at a public school. I obviously applied to public schools. I counsel students who want to attend public universities all the time. But it'll be really great to talk to someone. And I think you attended Boulder as well, correct?
I did. Yeah, I did my undergrad at the University of Colorado Boulder.
Okay, so you have really good extensive background experience. So first off, I think most people know this isn't the case, but every once in a while I still run into someone who says, "Are all private schools better than all public schools?" And I'm like, "Of course not."
Yeah.
And you're speaking to someone who knows a lot of private schools, but so let's just kind of start with that. And then the other thing, and part of the reason I want to address that is this notion that sort of all privates or all publics would be the same. Obviously, they're not. There's such a huge variety in terms of size and setting, and sometimes they have specialties, sometimes they don't, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
why don't we kind of start with what are some of the things that you like to that you would want to highlight for someone who's thinking about a public university?
Yeah. Yeah. So, kind of to your point, we need to clarify that there's a lot of different public universities out there. I think a lot of my discussion today is going to be focused on those big ones, but a lot of states have even medium and small public universities. So, making sure that people understand that you have a lot of options within your own state to continue education. Like you said, I sometimes feel that there's a question around prestige or is it good enough or will I get a good education? And honestly, I think some of this comes from the level of selectivity. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of your public schools could have 80% acceptance rates or 70% acceptance rates. But remember that selectivity is not always a perfect match for the quality of education.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these public universities were established to serve the state. They wanted to fill jobs, they wanted to educate the population within that state. And so they're dedicated to access, they're dedicated to keeping those doors open and opportunities open for their students. So that's just kind of a general introduction into the types of universities that are out
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yeah, they wouldn't be serving the state population if they were only admitting 15% of those who applied or something similar to that. So, um, now one of the things that I see always I went to a small college with a very particular kind of environment, and it was great for me, but I think 99% of the people who go to college wouldn't have been happy there, right? Because it didn't have fraternities, it didn't have or sororities, it didn't have athletics, it didn't have a lot of the traditional trappings of colleges, which for me was great. But sometimes students want that. That being said, one of the cool things about public schools is that I think they're big enough that there's kind of room for everybody, right? So why
Yeah.
don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, when I reflect on my own college experience, which I know was a while ago, but I could go back to the University of Colorado Boulder and probably have 25 different unique experiences, or more than that, thousands of different experiences based on what I choose, based on clubs I get involved in or groups I get involved in. So, one of the nice things about these large state public universities is they really have a pocket of campus and a place for everyone. I feel pretty confident in saying that these are the types of schools you can find your people. And
Mm-hmm.
if you find a group of people your freshman year, you might find a different group of people your sophomore year. There's a huge variety in people's interests. There's a huge variety in the different ways you can get involved, as well as the areas of study. So
Mm-hmm.
just the breadth of experience is amazing on these campuses. I love it because you'll look at their club and activity list, and there's over 200 different clubs and activities. So when you go to the activity fair and you learn about different ways to get involved, it can be overwhelming to some students because there's so many opportunities. But just choosing one or two, and you're going to get connected to that campus, you're going to make that bigger campus smaller and find your niche within that campus
Mm-hmm.
as well.
And I think that's an important thing to note. You're not going to automatically necessarily meet your people, but you put in a little effort and you'll find them. Like
Yeah.
that's, we have a colleague, and I mean, she probably wouldn't mind if I said her name, but I don't want to give all the particulars. She went to college in a state that is sort of known for being more conservative, and she's extremely liberal. And I was like, how did that work for you? And she said, well, you spot the people who are like you. And like, I joined the newspaper, and she said it wasn't a problem. Even if I
Yeah.
disagreed with, 60% of the students there, it wasn't that hard to find my niche.
Yeah.
Because you just you spot each other and you join the right organization. And I
Yeah.
thought that was really, like, that was interesting to me because I hadn't sort of thought that deeply about it either,
Mhm.
so
Absolutely. Well, and
yeah.
even the support services. So even if you are having a trouble getting connected or finding your space, a lot of these campuses not only have on-campus housing, they have staff dedicated to helping you feel connected, and it's a huge staff. They've got a lot of resources to support you through tutoring, to support you. There's groups like Trio on campus that support first generation and underserved populations. So just the breadth of supports as well as activities can really, really make a difference for students.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I wanted to mention too is the honors colleges. I'm sort of
Yeah.
continuously surprised at people who don't realize. Like, I was talking to a student the other day, who was thinking about Michigan State, and he appeared to be a very, very strong student.
Mhm.
University of Michigan was his top choice. He was from Michigan, but he also had Michigan State. And I said, "Were you looking at their honors college?" And he was like, "What's that?" And I thought, oh my God, this kid is
Yeah.
so competitive for their honors college, and it would make Michigan State this whole other experience for him.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know we did a segment on Honors College not too long ago, so definitely go back
Yeah.
and listen to that one. But honors colleges are a fantastic space for that high achieving student
Mhm.
who wants to still be surrounded by other high achieving students. Maybe they were a student that took a lot of AP or IB in school. Maybe they were a student really involved in research. And maybe their college list includes some highly selective schools like your student with Michigan and Michigan State. But honors colleges are formed in different ways on campuses in such a way that a student may even be able to live with other honors students. They may have access to specialized classes that are smaller and led by hand-picked faculty. So they're meant to push that student a little bit more. Some of the campuses I worked at, the honors college had like a capstone project. So they even had a specific research project that they were working on, and they had a faculty mentor and they had to defend that research. So almost like a graduate school experience
Mhm.
in the undergrad. But I am hearing more and more families talk about honors colleges, and I want them to think even more broader than that. Some of these schools, like when I was at Boulder, they not only had the honors college, but they had several select research groups on campus. So as part of the application for admission, you could apply for this research fellowship or be a part of this select group. So maybe you're not as into the social side of an honors college because they have a lot of fun too. They go on
Mhm.
rafting trips or do different outings together, but maybe you really want to specialize in a particular area of research, and these different little specialized programs almost create a selective school experience within that larger public school.
Mhm. I like to emphasize that too, because to get into graduate school,
Yeah,
recommendations are very important. And
yeah.
I remember when I worked for Reed, and this wasn't even a public school, it was just a very large private. I would get transfers from there, and these students had a terrible time getting letters of recommendation. And that
Mhm.
was why they were transferring, is because they'd been in huge lectures
Yeah,
and they wanted a more intimate experience. And I'd get letters from professors who said, well, I gave him an A, so he was a great student because I only give A's to the top 15%. but I don't really remember it because there were 300 students in the class. And I just thought, well, now I really want to admit this poor kid because he did the best he could. Again, this
Yeah.
wasn't even a public school, but I think like think about thinking strategically, especially if you want to go to grad school, those recommendations are going to be really important. So
Yeah, and I think even grad school, definitely, but even just for employment and some of the
mhm,
networking, I do think at these bigger schools, you have to be intentional about
mm,
making connections. And I think that's sometimes why maybe a shy student or someone that just wants to blend into the background may end up with a letter that's a little bit, not as spicy. Um,
mhm,
but I do like to point out, even in those big lecture halls, a lot of these schools will have 1 day a week where you meet in what's called a
mhm,
small recitation. So maybe you have a lecture hall of 450 students, which is
mhm,
huge, which some students love that. It's kind of
mhm,
that quintessential college picture of what I
mhm,
imagine college to be. But a lot of these classes then have a smaller meeting during the week where you can review the material. Oftentimes, they're taught by grad students. So you might even make a connection with a grad student on campus, which can sometimes then
mhm,
lead to research, which
mhm,
can sometimes lead to where you go to grad school and mentorship. But I do feel like a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to go to the big school because of those big classes. But they often meet in smaller meetings, especially those early years. It can also really depend on your major.
mhm,
If you're intro engineering and there's multiple engineering degrees on that campus, you can be ready for some large lectures. But when it comes to labs or specific smaller majors, you might have a smaller experience on that campus. For example, I got my degree in the journalism department, and we had only 45 students in my particular degree program, but I went to a school with 25,000 students. So that can show you kind of the ratio as well, depending on what you study.
mhm. That's absolutely. My brother and sister both went to UC Berkeley, and
Mhm.
my brother was a physics major. So his initial classes were huge, but by his junior and senior year, he was actually in a very small department and got enormous mentoring from faculty.
Yeah.
My sister in political science didn't get the same experience, and I want to be really clear that it could be totally different there now. Like as you can see from my gray hair, this was a long time ago, but I do think like looking at the majors, and you can even go to College Navigator and look up exactly how many students are in different majors to
Hmm.
get a sense of who's graduating and like how many students are in your major, and then compare that to the number of faculty. And that can be very useful, I think.
Yeah, that can be very telling. That's great advice.
Yeah,
So,
and I know that like you never want to put down a school, but I think UC Berkeley can handle it. I think they're pretty bulletproof. Like it's like
y-
I get to bag on Harvard if I want to too. You know what I mean?
yeah, exactly.
So it's clearly a very, very good school, and a few people have heard of it. So I think it's okay. So,
And I
um,
think that's a great example, like
mhm,
UC Berkeley, Michigan. Those are
mhm,
big name publics that you know of that have great reputations that are more selective to get into. So don't put those public schools in a bag of, oh, it's not a good education. But even those with higher acceptance rates, some of the research, some of the quality of faculty. I mean, some of these campuses have Nobel laureates teaching your
mhm,
intro class. And so there can be really great opportunities for the right
mhm.
student.
Yeah, yeah. And there are there are public, if you want a smaller school, like there
Mhm.
are, I'm trying to think, William and Mary in Virginia, that's a public
Yeah,
school,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Oregon has Southern Oregon
yeah.
College. That's public,
Good
right?
job.
That's
Yep.
very small. So again, like, and I think this is important to note because saving money, if you're one of those families that's not going to get significant financial aid, you want to, there are these different opportunities and experiences at that level of kind of in-state tuition.
Yeah. And to your point of grad school, especially if you're thinking medical school, MBA, going on to graduate level work, saving some money during these undergraduate years by going to your state public can be a huge impact on your long-term financial health as well.
Mhm.
I loved it. A colleague here at Bright Horizons, they were telling me about a student they worked with. He really wanted to go to Brown, but he got a full ride scholarship to University of Nebraska. And he was really torn. Do I go to Brown or do I go to Nebraska? And he couldn't turn down that option of free. And guess where he went to medical school? Brown.
Yeah.
So, you can end up at some of these other schools and institutions, later for your graduate level work. Or like University of Colorado is a great example. During your undergrad years, you can get some exposure to the medical school there, and you could be a competitive applicant to their medical school and do all of your education through the same state public institution. So there's a lot of pathways that way too.
Yeah, I'll close. If it's okay, I want to close with this one anecdote that I've mentioned to many students. I worked with a student who she went to Yale for undergrad and then Stanford for medical school. So I was lucky enough to see like who she was going to school with, and they said what the undergraduate institutions were. And multiple of them had gone to Arizona State, which I thought was pretty cool. Now, I'm 100% confident they were in the honors college at Arizona State, right? And this is just 1 year. Other years it might have been Boulder or University of Arizona or University of Wyoming or wherever it might be, but that particular year. And I just thought, there you go. Like that says something about the power of these honors colleges, So anyway, well, listen, Brittany, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. All right. So when we're going to take a break now, and when we come back, I'll be speaking with Neil Riley about small liberal arts and sciences colleges. Thank you.